Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling the Horn of Africa.
Oh, a fascinating region.
Really complex.
Yeah,
We've got a ton of material to get through.
a lot of different angles.
Yeah, reports, analyses, even court documents,
Wow.
all aimed at understanding what's happening in this really dynamic part of the world.
The Horn of Africa is often overlooked,
You're right, it doesn't always get the attention it deserves.
but it really is a hub of global activity.
Right, and it's not just about these 6 countries.
Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti.
Kenya, Sudan, and Somalia.
Yeah, it's about how these countries
Yeah.
are connected to global power dynamics, to climate change,
It's all connected.
to just the quest for stability in a really tough neighborhood.
Yeah, you can't ignore that.
No.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Okay.
I think we can't talk about the Horn of Africa without talking about conflict.
Yeah, it's a region that's been plagued by conflict for decades.
It's a recurring theme for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the most concerning developments, I think, is the tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Right.
I mean, remember that 2018 peace deal?
A lot of optimism at the time.
Yeah, there was so much hope.
Right. It felt like a new era.
What happened?
Well, on the surface, things were good.
Yeah.
Borders reopened, families reunited, trade resumed.
Okay.
But underneath, some long-standing issues never really went away.
Like what? What's driving this tension?
Well, a big factor is Ethiopia's desire for secure sea access.
That makes sense.
Being landlocked puts them at a disadvantage.
Especially for a country with ambitions.
Exactly. They want to be a regional power.
Right.
And they need access to the sea to do that.
So they're looking to Eritrea as a potential solution.
Right. Eritrea has a long coastline,
Makes sense.
and that's where things get tricky.
Okay.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been very vocal about Ethiopia's need for a port.
And how's Eritrea responding to that?
Well, they're nervous.
Understandably.
Eritrea has been fiercely independent since gaining independence from Ethiopia back in 1993.
A hard-won independence.
They fought a long and bloody war for their sovereignty,
Right.
and they're not going to give that up easily.
They're not going to compromise.
Exactly.
So it's not just talk.
No, there are worrying signs.
Like what? Give me the details.
Well, there are reports of Ethiopia amassing troops near the Eritrean border,
Oh, wow.
specifically in Zalambesa,
Where's that?
just 100 miles from Eritrea's capital, Asmara.
That close.
Yeah. And there's also activity near the port of Assab.
Assab. That's strategically important.
Right. It's a vital port.
And how close is that to the border?
Just 45 miles.
Wow, Eritrea must be feeling the pressure.
They see these moves as a threat, and they're preparing to defend their territory.
So we've got this escalating tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Yeah, it's a potential flashpoint.
How does this tie into the broader conflict landscape in the Horn?
Well, there are other areas we need to watch.
Okay.
Another major concern is Somalia.
All right, Somalia has been struggling for so long.
Decades of civil war.
And then there's al-Shabaab.
A constant threat.
Are they still a major force?
Yes, although the Somali National Army, with international support,
Okay.
has been making some gains against them.
So there's some progress.
It's a slow process.
But the threat is still real.
Very real.
And what about that maritime dispute with Kenya? I've been hearing about that.
Yes, the ICJ ruling.
What was that about again?
The International Court of Justice ruled in Somalia's favor back in 2021
Okay.
over a disputed maritime area.
Uh-huh.
It's a patch of the Indian Ocean that could hold oil and gas reserves.
So there are big economic stakes?
Exactly.
And how has Kenya responded to the ruling?
They rejected it.
So that's adding to the tension,
Absolutely. It's strained relations between the two countries.
making a complex situation even more complex.
Yeah,
And what about Kenya itself? They're often seen as a success story in the region.
it's true. Kenya is East Africa's economic powerhouse.
They play a big role in regional peacekeeping, right?
Yeah.
But they're not without their challenges.
No country is.
Right. What are some of the internal pressures they're facing?
Well, their recent elections have been contentious.
Okay.
There have been disputes, allegations of corruption.
And then there's their rejection of the ICJ ruling.
Yeah, it raises questions about their commitment to international law,
And their willingness to cooperate with their neighbors.
right?
So even Kenya, a relative bright spot.
It has its own complexities.
That seems to be a theme in the Horn of Africa.
Contracts and contradictions.
Yeah, each country has its own unique set of challenges.
But they're all interconnected in a way
Absolutely.
that can be both fascinating and frustrating.
And speaking of complex and frustrating,
Where are we going now?
Sudan, we can't leave them out.
Right. Their journey towards democracy has been difficult.
It's been a bumpy road
A few years ago, there was so much hope.
after al-Bashir was ousted, right?
Yeah, felt like a new chapter.
A fresh start.
They had a civilian-led transitional government.
And then the military staged a coup in 2021,
It was a major setback.
shattered those hopes for democracy.
Plunged Sudan back into turmoil.
What's the situation like there now?
It's deeply concerning.
In what way?
The coup triggered widespread protests.
Right.
And the military responded with brutal crackdowns.
Oh, no.
Sadly, over 125 protesters have been killed,
That's heartbreaking.
including many minors.
So it's a very volatile situation.
Yeah, and the consequences extend beyond Sudan's borders.
How so?
Well, there's a risk of a massive refugee crisis.
That would destabilize the entire region.
Exactly, and it could draw in external actors,
Each with their own agendas.
making the situation even more complicated.
A recipe for disaster.
It's a reminder of how fragile peace can be.
And how interconnected the challenges are in the Horn.
Right, one problem spills over into another.
Okay, we've covered Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Kenya, and Sudan.
A lot of ground to cover.
And we can't forget about Djibouti.
The tiny but mighty Djibouti.
It's a small country, but I've heard it described as having big geopolitical weight.
That's a good way to put it.
Why is that?
It's all about location.
Location, location, location.
Djibouti sits on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait,
Right. That's a vital choke point for global trade.
connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden.
And it hosts multiple foreign military bases, right?
Yes, it's quite a collection.
Is that unusual for such a small country?
It is, but Djibouti has turned its location into an asset.
They're playing their cards, right?
They're hosting bases from the US, France, China, Japan.
Wow, that's quite a mix.
It's a balancing act.
So what's Djibouti's strategy in all of this?
They're trying to maintain good relationships with all these global powers.
While pursuing their own economic goals.
Right, they're trying to develop their economy.
That can't be easy, especially with all the internal challenges they face.
No, it's not.
Like what? They have high poverty rates, high youth unemployment.
It's a tough balancing act.
They're playing a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess, trying to make the most of their position.
In a very complex region.
So even the smallest player can have a big impact.
It's true.
Each country brings its own unique dynamics to the table.
The Horn of Africa is a fascinating place.
And one of the most unpredictable regions in the world?
Definitely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
It's a complex region.
We've explored the intricate web of conflicts and challenges,
Each country has its own story.
from simmering border tensions to internal political struggles.
And they're all connected.
That's the key takeaway.
Yeah.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll zoom out a bit
Okay.
and look at the broader forces shaping the Horn of Africa's destiny.
The bigger picture?
Yeah, we'll explore the rising influence of new global powers, the impacts of climate change,
And the potential for both conflict and cooperation.
because there's always potential for both.
Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the geopolitical landscape of the Horn of Africa.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Horn of Africa. In part one, we unpacked the individual struggles of each nation.
Lots of moving pieces.
Yeah, and now I'm curious about the bigger picture.
Okay.
What global forces are at play here?
Well, one of the most significant trends is the rise of new global powers.
That's been a big topic lately.
Yeah, challenging the traditional dominance of the West.
You're talking about China, Turkey, the Gulf states.
Exactly. They're all making their presence felt in the Horn.
It seems like everyone's interested in the region these days.
For good reason, the Horn is strategically important,
And resource rich.
and it's a gateway to Africa.
So let's break it down, starting with China.
Okay.
What's their game plan in the Horn?
China's strategy is multifaceted. They're hungry for resources, new markets.
To fuel their economic growth?
Exactly.
Right.
And they're also keen on securing access to vital shipping routes.
Like the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Precisely. That's a key choke point.
It's all about controlling those trade routes.
And that explains their heavy investment in Djibouti.
Ah, the military bases we talked about.
Djibouti is a key node in China's Belt and Road Initiative.
They've poured a lot of money into that country.
Ports, infrastructure, even a military base.
Wow. Djibouti must be feeling the pressure.
It's a delicate balancing act for them.
Yeah, to manage all these relationships.
Yeah, with all these powerful countries.
All right, moving on to Turkey. What's their approach?
Turkey, under Erdogan, has pursued a more assertive foreign policy.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, particularly in regions with historical and cultural links to the Ottoman Empire.
Interesting.
And the Horn, with its large Muslim population, fits into that strategy.
So it's more than just economics.
It's also about cultural and religious influence,
A soft power approach.
investing in infrastructure, offering aid,
Building mosques and schools.
strengthening diplomatic ties.
Boosting their regional influence.
It's a long-term strategy.
Okay, so we've got China, we've got Turkey. What about the Gulf states? They seem to be getting more involved in the Horn.
For the Gulf states, security and stability in the Horn is paramount.
I see.
They see instability as a threat to their own security.
So they're more focused on containing threats.
Yeah, maintaining the status quo.
Preventing the spread of instability.
Exactly.
So how are they doing that?
Investing in military aid, supporting friendly governments.
Building their own military bases?
They want to be prepared.
That's a lot of power dynamics at play.
It's a complex game of chess.
And then there's climate change. We can't forget about that.
Climate change is a huge factor in the Horn.
It's making everything worse.
Exacerbating conflicts, driving displacement, creating competition over resources.
It's a threat multiplier.
The droughts in Somalia, for example.
People are starving.
It's a humanitarian disaster.
And the floods in other parts of the region.
It's a vicious cycle.
Climate change fuels conflict. Conflict undermines resilience to climate change.
Exactly.
So what can be done?
Well, investing in climate adaptation and mitigation is crucial.
Okay.
Sharing technology, expertise.
Helping countries transition to sustainable development.
There's a lot of potential for renewable energy in the Horn.
I was thinking about that. Solar and wind.
Abundant sunshine, strong winds.
And it creates jobs, boosts the economy,
Reduces dependence on fossil fuels.
which can be a source of conflict themselves.
It's a win-win situation.
But it can't just be big projects, right?
No, we also need community-based approaches.
Drought-resistant crops, water conservation, early warning systems.
Empowering local communities to build resilience.
Because they're the ones on the front lines.
Exactly. They have the knowledge, the experience.
So we've got conflict, rising global powers, and climate change.
A lot on their plate.
It feels overwhelming,
It's a lot to process.
but there are glimmers of hope
There are people working to build a better future.
and opportunities for positive change.
That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Shifting from analysis to action.
Potential solutions, strategies, choices ahead.
It's not all doom and gloom.
Stay tuned as we explore possibilities for a brighter future in the Horn of Africa.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into the Horn of Africa. We've covered a lot of ground, some of it pretty heavy stuff, conflicts, global power struggles, the impact of climate change. It's a lot.
It's true, the challenges are immense, but there are also reasons to be optimistic about the future of this region.
Okay, good. I was hoping you'd say that. So let's talk about solutions. Where do we even begin? What are the key priorities for building a more stable and prosperous Horn of Africa?
Well, I think we have to start with conflict resolution. As long as these conflicts continue, it's going to be very difficult to make real progress on any other front.
Yeah, conflict resolution has to be the foundation for sure. But how do you even begin to untangle such deeply rooted conflicts? It seems like an almost impossible task.
It's certainly a long and difficult process, but I think one of the most important things is to create space for inclusive dialogue. That means bringing all stakeholders to the table, not just the usual power brokers.
So you're saying we need to give a voice to those who are often marginalized, right?
Uh.
Like women, youth, civil society organizations, those who are typically excluded from traditional peace processes.
Exactly. Their perspectives are essential for creating lasting solutions. And just as importantly, external actors need to play a more constructive role. Instead of fueling proxy conflicts, they need to genuinely support mediation efforts and provide incentives for peace.
So it's about shifting from a zero-sum mentality to a win-win approach.
Precisely. And speaking of win-win, another key priority is tackling climate change. As we've discussed, climate change is a major threat multiplier in the Horn of Africa. It's exacerbating existing conflicts, driving displacement, and undermining development efforts.
Right. It's all interconnected. You can't talk about peace and development without addressing the environmental challenges that are undermining both.
Absolutely. And the good news is that there are already some promising initiatives underway in the region. Several countries are investing heavily in renewable energy.
Oh, yeah. There's huge potential for solar and wind power in the Horn, isn't there?
Enormous potential. And not only does it address climate change, but it also reduces reliance on fossil fuels, which can be a source of conflict in themselves.
Right. Less dependence on those volatile global markets. And it creates jobs, stimulates the economy.
It's a win-win all around. And it's not just about big infrastructure projects. We also need to focus on those community-based approaches to climate adaptation that we were talking about earlier.
Right, like drought-resistant crops, water conservation techniques, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Empowering those local communities to build resilience from the ground up, because they're the ones who are most directly impacted by these changes.
It's about giving them the tools and resources they need to adapt. Okay, so we've got conflict resolution and climate action high on the agenda. What else is crucial for unlocking the Horn of Africa's potential?
Well, sustainable and inclusive economic development is key. The region has a young and growing population, abundant natural resources, but that potential can only be realized if economic growth benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Right, it's about creating opportunities for all, not just the elites. But how do you ensure that economic growth is inclusive and doesn't just exacerbate existing inequalities?
That's the challenge. And it requires a multi-pronged approach. Investing in education and healthcare, building infrastructure, creating an environment that fosters entrepreneurship and innovation.
And what about the role of women in all of this?
Empowering women is essential. Women play a vital role in peace building, economic development, and climate resilience. When women are able to participate fully in society, everyone benefits.
It's about unleashing that untapped potential. But empowering women also means addressing the gender inequality and discrimination that's still pervasive in many parts of the Horn of Africa.
Absolutely. We need to dismantle those structural barriers that hold women back, and that requires a sustained effort from all sectors of society.
So we've talked about conflict resolution, climate action, inclusive economic development. What's the common thread running through all of these?
Well, I'd say it's good governance. Without accountable, transparent, and effective institutions, it's very difficult to make real progress on any of these fronts.
Good governance is essential, for
Mhm.
sure. It's the foundation upon which everything else is built.
It's about ensuring that resources are distributed fairly, that the rule of law is upheld, that citizens have a voice in decision-making. It's about creating a system where everyone has a stake in the future and where leaders are accountable to the people they serve.
That's the ideal. But how do you promote good governance in a region with a history of conflict and authoritarianism?
It's not easy, but there are some encouraging signs. We've seen progress in some countries where civil society is playing a more active role in holding leaders accountable and pushing for reforms.
So it's about empowering citizens to demand better governance and supporting those who are working to promote transparency and accountability.
Exactly. And it also requires pressure from the international community, holding governments accountable for respecting human rights, upholding the rule of law, and combating corruption.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, explored some complex issues, and I think come away with a better understanding of the challenges and opportunities facing the Horn of Africa.
It's a region that's often overlooked, but it's a region that deserves our attention.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue learning about this fascinating and dynamic part of the world. The more we understand the Horn of Africa, the better equipped we'll be to contribute to positive change.
And who knows, maybe even inspire some of you to get involved in building a brighter future for the region. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.